So we'll begin today, Be'ezer Hashem, on Maimon Parshas Korach from the Balatanya. Va'avad Halevi hu. That's page 109, the second column, or Daf Nun Hey, column 2. If you go to Nun Hey, column 2, or 109, on top it should say Korach. Va'avad Halevi hu. So just a little context. In Parshas Korach, of course, you have the story of the mutiny, the revolution, the Mapecha, that Korach and 250 leaders made against Moshe and Aaron. Following that comes the parsha known as Matnas Kohuna. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that it says Vayomer Hashem al Aaron. Hashem tells Aaron. Rashi says he told Moshe to tell Aaron. He tells him the responsibilities of the Kohanim and the Leviim in protecting the Mishkan and serving in the Mishkan and taking care of the Mishkan and all of its details. And then he enumerates the Matnas Kohuna, the various gifts that the Kohanim received. In Perek Yud Ches, Pasuk Chav Gimel, he speaks about the fact after the Kohanim received Trumas and the Leviim received Maasros, what's known as Truma and Maaser. And then the pasuk says an interesting lashon. That's the Maimer. It begins Perek Yud Ches pasuk Chav Gimel. Va'avad Halevi hu es avodas oyel mayad. The Levi should serve and do the work in the oyel mayad, in the tent, in the Mishkan, and they would not inherit among the other Jewish people the land. They were given places to live. They weren't given real estate that they owned. But the language is Va'avad Halevi hu. Now, obviously, when you read this in Lashon Kodesh, you right away your ears perk up because the sentence is very difficult. You could say Va'avad Halevi es avodas oyel mayad. The Levi should do the avodah in the oyel mayad. Va'avad Halevi hu es avodas oyel mayad. Who's the who? In English, the Levi should serve he the avodah of the oyel mayad. The structure is very difficult to understand. Now, obviously, the Torah is saying Va'avad Halevi, the Levi should serve who? He, but it's completely superfluous. You said Va'avad Halevi es avodas oyel mayad. What's Va'avad Halevi hu es avodas oyel mayad? So it's one of these psukim. You see that there's a message here, and it's beyond the pshat, because the word "hu" is completely, apparently unnecessary, superfluous, and furthermore, it would disturb the sentence. V'avad halevi avodas oyel mayad. So the Zohar asks a question, and the Zohar says, Taked Even Ezer also asks. Even Ezer says, "V'avad halevi hu ba'atzmai." He should do it himself. V'avad halevi, don't send shluchim. Well, you use V'avad halevi hu. It's still difficult because it says that the Yisrael shouldn't do it. Fakir, they shouldn't come close, and the Levi should do it. So obviously, the Levi is not sending shluchim from Yisrael. But that's the point is that the word hu is difficult. So the Zohar asks the question: what does hu mean? The Zohar says that the pshat is Va'avad Halevi hu. The avodah of the Levi is in the hu. The hu is not stam repeating the word. He should do it. The Levi is he. Va'avad Halevi hu. The avodah of the Levi is in the hu. What does this mean? So that's going to be the focus here. Va'avad Halevi hu pirush k'mashakasav b'zohar. The Zohar says in the Parshas Korach, Shekol avodas Haleviim hainu lahamshich mebchinas hu. The whole work of the Leviim was to access or to draw forth, to be mamshich. Mamshich means to draw forth, to access from the state of hu. Va'avad Halevi, the whole avodah of the Levi is hu. to bring out the who. How did he do it? As avodas oyel mayid, in the avoid of the oyel mayid. The who is not only not an extra word, it defines the avoid of the Levi. What does this mean? What does it mean? The hamshich b'bchinas who? What's who? Who means he? Who in English is H-E, is he, who, he. So he says, it represents something. Shehu Binah, Alma Diskasya, Alma Disgalia. It means bringing out Alma Diskasya, the concealed world, into Alma Disgalia, into the revealed world. That's Va'avad Halevihu. Generally, we know that in Lashon Kodesh, like in other languages, there's different ways of communicating. Depends if the person is here, the person is absent. Ata, when I say you, Ata, it's called Lashon Noichach. Right? It's a second person. You're right in front of me, and I could say you. If you say who, he, it means you're not here, right? I'm not going to... It's called Lashon Nister. It's like you speak in third person. The person is not present. So you say, he told me yesterday. Right? Or he's in Australia. Or he's in London. In other words, he's not right here. It's something that is more concealed. That's the word who versus ata. Ata is Lashon Noichach, and who is Lashon Nister. So that's Pashat, and Al Pi Diktuk, Pashat, the grammar of Hebrew, how it works. When it's Hey Vav Aleph, it's masculine, and when it's Hey Yud Aleph, it's feminine. Right? Hu nimtza beretz Yisrael, he nimtzat beretz Yisrael. In the Polish Yiddish, there's no difference. Who and he is the Zalbazach, Vavad Halevi, he. But there's a Hey Vav Aleph and there's a Hey Yud Aleph. It's different. It's Pashat spelled in the Tzeiv Torah different. You know what I mean? Vavad Halevi, he. But it's who? I don't know. At least in the Litvische Yiddish. In the Litvische Yiddish, sagt man who. Hey Vav Aleph. Hey versus Hey Yud Aleph. Because he is feminine, it's a woman. And who is masculine? It's a Zachar, it's masculine. So Vavad HaLevi, who the Zohar says is that the avodah of the Levi was to bring from the concealed, from who? That which is not present. It's Alma Diskasya, the concealed world, into Alma Diskasya, into the revealed world. Into Alma Disgalia, into the revealed world. And he says that's Binah. That's what the Zohar says. Now what does this mean? First of all, what does it mean to bring from Alma Diskasya to Alma Disgalia? Second of all, what's the connection to Binah? Third of all, what's the connection to the Levium? And why does the Torah say it here suddenly? Va'avad Halevihu. Va'inyan, to explain this, so for this we have to understand the fundamental difference between what's called in Sfarim of Kabbalah and in Chassidus, Moichin da Abba and Moichin da Imma. Literally, Moichin means the mind. The Moich is the mind. Right? The mind is the house. The Moich is a brain. But the brain, of course, is the house. It houses the mind. The consciousness of the mind. So Moichin is the word that's used when you want to describe the brain, the mind, awareness, a person's consciousness, a person's cognitive abilities. It's called Moichin. Yeah. You say Abal Moichin means somebody who's intellectual, somebody who's cerebral. The Moich, generally, Moich is the brain, the mind. But in Kabbalah it says that there's Moichin the Abba, there's the level of there's the Moichin, there's the awareness of the father, and there's Moichin and there's the mind of the Imma of the mother. In other words, it's also called Chachma and Binah. Chachma is called Moichin the Abba. Chachma and Binah are both intellectual faculties. They're both abilities of the brain. Right? You have the first three spheres are Chachma, Binah, and Das. Chabad, Chachma, Binah, Das. So these three are all parts of the brain and of the mind, but it's different dimensions, it's different faculties. It's also Pashat physically different parts of the brain. The right hemisphere of the brain, the left hemisphere of the brain. Moichin da Abba is considered the right, Moichin da Imma is considered the left. It says this in Zohar. Today we also know it, with CAT scans and neuroscience, so it's you could see it. Different parts of the brain that are responsible for different experiences in the body and for different functional abilities in the person, including in cognition. So you have Moichin da Abba, Moichin da Imma. What's the difference? Pirush. Moichin da Abba hu b'chinas hasagas habitl. B'chinas Chachma, shehu b'chinas koyach ma, v'nachnu ma. Shehu b'chinas kridus, shehu b'chinas yirei la, yirei boishus, shehu b'chinas v'achachma me'ayin timotzi tachlis habitl. So I say 3 lines, but there's a lot here in these lines. Now with these terms, some of us are probably familiar from different Maimarim, because these terms are not uncommon. But here he puts it together. What is the Baal HaTanya saying here? He says, Moichin the Abba, the first thing he says is Hasagas Habitl. And then he says it's Chachma. And what is Chachma? Chachma is 2 words. Koyach Ma. The Koyach of Ma. Chaf Ches, Mem He is Chachma. If you reconfigure the letters, Chachma is Chaf, Ches, Chaf, Mem He is Koyach Ma. The Koyach of Ma. What's Koyach Ma? So he brings a pasuk from Parshas B'Shalach, where Moshe says, when they attack him and Aaron, V'nachnu ma. What are we? V'nachnu ma. What are we? That you're attacking us. And he says that's an element of kridus. Now kridus means coldness. It's strange. What does he mean? It's cold. It's cold. It's not hot. And then he connects it to yirei la. Yirei la means there's a higher level of yira. There's a yira tata. There's a lower level of yira. It says in Zohar, in the introduction, there's different levels of yira. So there's yira tata, lower level, and yirei la, higher level of yira. And he says that that's yira boishas. It's a yira, it's an awe that's connected to boishas. Boishas is usually translated as shame. What's the connection to shame? And then he connects it to a pasuk in Mishlei, ha-chachma me'ayin timatze, which means chachma is found. Literally, ha-chachma me'ayin timatze means where you're going to find chachma. Where you're going to find it. You're not going to walk in the street and find wisdom, right? Where you're going to find a smart man. Where you're going to find them? In the street. You could find in the street a diamond. You could find in the street $100. Ha-chachma me'ayin timatze. But he teaches va-chachma in the positive. Chachma me'ayin timatze. Chachma comes from ayin. And that's tachlis habitl. This is contrast. Upchinas moichin de'ima is pchinas binah. Moichin de'ima, that's binah. That's the mother. The awareness of the mother is binah. What's binah? Nikra lahanchil oy havayesh. The pasuk says, it's the end of Shisha Sidra Mishnah. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that Asir HaKadosh, the last Mishnah in Maseches Uktzim, the end of the whole Shas, the whole Mishnah is Asir HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil l'chol tzadik v'tzadik shloish meyes ve'esrei elamus. Hashem is going to bequeath to every tzaddik 310 worlds. Shai elamus, 310. Shenemar, the pasuk says, lahanchil oy havai yesh v'yitzreseim amale. I'm going to bequeath to my beloved ones, to my friends, yesh. Yesh is shin yud, 310. Yesh also means something, yesh. V'yitzreseim amale, I'll fill their treasure chests, their oitzres, I'll fill them. So he says, moichin de'im is called binah, lahanchil oy havai yesh. Versus moichin de'abba, which he said is not yesh, it's ayin, it's bitl. Shehu ma'shabah ha'ara migdolasi yizbarach l'klal havana v'asaga mamash. Because this is the state in which a ha'ara, a ray, or a glimmer, or a radiance of his greatness comes to a place where it can be comprehended and grasped mamash in a real way. Havana is understanding and asaga is grasp, mamash. So b'meila, that's moichin de'ima. That's the description here. Moichin de'abba versus moichin de'ima. Now let's try to understand this. What is the Baal HaTanya saying? What's the difference between the two? And then afterwards he's going to explain why the two are so essential and necessary. And not only that, it says in Zohar that Chachma and Binah treinei in the Perspiration. They're 2 inseparable friends. Which is my Tati married Mommy, and Mommy married Tati, as the kids used to say. Al kein yazav ishes aviv es imay v'davak be'ishtoi v'hayu l'basar echad. So he associates it immediately with Chachma and Binah. Right. What's the difference between Chachma and Binah? So in many Maimarim, already beginning in Tanya in chapter 3 and chapter 18 and other places, and in many Maamarim of the Balatanya, based on many explanations in the world of Kabbalah, the world of Chassidus, Machshava. What's the difference between Chachma and Binah? The terms are used a lot. You already have in Chumash. You have the concept of Chachma and you have the concept of Binah. About Betzalel, it says, there's an inyan of Chacham, there's an inyan of Binah. There's an inyan of Chacham, there's an inyan of Navain, Mavin. Then there's a third inyan Das. But here the focus is Chachma and Binah. So it's called the father and the mother, the masculine and the feminine. What's the difference? The key difference in Chachma and Binah he defines here is Ayin and Yesh. Ayin and Yesh. HaChachma may Ayin timatzeh. Chachma emerges from Ayin. And therefore, it's connected to Ayin. Binah is Lahanchil Oyavai Yesh. Yesh. And that's why he says Binah is when there's a Ha'ara, Migdalasi is Baruch, and it comes Liklal Havana V'asaga Mamash. You get it, you understand it. Because it's Ha'ara, Migdalasi is Baruch. And that's the concept of Yesh. To try to bring this down, what does this mean? A very common metaphor that's brought for Chachma and Binah is if somebody is struggling with an idea, you don't understand something. You read it and you read it again and you read it again. It's not that you don't understand the language, then it won't help. You're reading 100 times. You understand the language. You may even understand the words. But it's a get nicht da rein. You're learning a piece of Gemara, it's a hard piece of Gemara. You read it again. You know you're missing something. Or whatever else, whatever you're reading. Or you have a dilemma in life. It could be you're reading Parshas, a difficult text, or you have a dilemma in life. And you're trying to figure things out. Could be a dilemma in business, could be a dilemma in a person's life, whatever it may be, and the person is struggling. And they don't see a way out. They don't see a way out. And you think about it again, and maybe you ask me, but you just don't have an understanding of this thing that you're reading, this thing you're trying to figure out, this thing you're learning. And then, some of you know the feeling very well, maybe some more than others. You have what they call in English an epiphany. An epiphany is you're walking in the street, right? And you thought you were daydreaming. Really, you were thinking about your problem. You didn't even realize you were thinking about the problem. And suddenly, boom, there's like a, what is it called? The light bulb moment? What do they call it? A brainstorm. A light bulb goes off, you know? Like literally a light bulb goes out. The Alter Rebbe calls it in the Maimah, Barak HaMavrik. It's like in the wilderness and pitch dark. I don't know if you ever had the experience. And so, a blitz, yeah. A blitz. And there's a Barak. Barak is lightning, HaMavrik. And it sheds, it casts such a powerful light. You know the intensity of the light of the lightning and the electricity. It's incredibly powerful. Half of a fellow what there is in that electricity, and one lightning. And suddenly there's a light that goes off, literally like a light goes off in your brain. You're like reading, you're reading the text, you're walking, maybe you're sitting on a couch on a Monday morning or Wednesday afternoon, and there's a lightning that goes off. And it's like, you just feel, you got it, you got the idea. Or you're trying to figure something out, and suddenly something pops into your brain. Where did it come from? Out of nowhere. Where did it come from? Can we identify where it came from? No. It just came in. But where did it come from? UPS delivered it. Amazon made a delivery, prime delivery, straight to your brain. It's a very powerful feeling when it happens. What is that? That's called Chachma. Generally, that's called Chachma. Then there's Binah. Binah is very different. I say, wow. And you feel it. Somebody says, what? I say, I got it. Tell me, what do you get? No, I can't talk. I can't tell you anything. Why can't you tell me if you got it? I can't say it. If you say, you're going to ruin it. You have to sit with it. It's not yet ready. It's not yet, it's achla paga. You know, when you eat a fig that's unripe, it's called paga in Mishnayos. It's not ready to be eaten. It's not ready to be digested. Tell me. I can't tell you anything. You have to sit with it and you have to develop it. Literally, you have to develop it. You got this seminal idea. You got the point. You got the core. You got the atzmius. But it has no It has no kalim. It has to be fleshed out. It needs flesh. Fleshed out. No structure. No bones, no sinews. No expression. It needs to be expanded, needs to be developed. If not, if it stays at that point, the lightning doesn't stay forever. The lightning comes and goes. It's all over. Similar to the seed of the father. The seed of the father, the tippah, has tremendous koyach. We know that it pollinates the egg, and through that, with its combination with the egg of the mother, the half a cell and the half a cell, you create the first cell, which develops Be'ezrat Hashem into the embryo that grows into a fetus that will grow into a child that can be born. But at that seminal point before the 9 months of development, right? If somebody says, "Oh, we have a child here," child won't be able to be viable. Nothing will remain, and that sometimes happens. Miscarriage, etc. Or the conception doesn't happen, or even if the conception happens, the later stages of development don't happen for whatever reason. So you need the mother. That's Meichin de Ima. That's why Binah is connected to the mother, and Chachma is connected to the father. Because the mother is the one who takes it, and she develops it in her womb, not in the father's womb. But the biological structure of how Hashem created the birth of a child represents, like everything, Nasa Adam B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, everything in a person's life represents, it's a mirror of the way things are, Kivayachal, in the spiritual structure of the universe and the divine structure. That's the Yesod of Torah Sanister. Mipsari Echzelika, like the Alter Rebbe always quotes the pasuk, from my flesh I can perceive Hashem. So from your own mechanisms, from your own soul, you can Echzelika, to pasuk in Iyov. You could see a Likkutei, you can appreciate a Likkutei. So those are the two stages, Chachma and Binah. Now very often it doesn't happen with us, because if I'm just reading material that's not difficult, I don't need Chachma. If you're just reading cereal boxes, or the sports section in the newspaper, right? Or B'chala magazine, as somebody once told me that he stopped reading magazines years ago. I said, why? He said, because he realized that every week it says the same thing, it's just the letters are configured in a different order, but it basically says the same thing. It's not challenging him. So then you're not going to need an epiphany, right? Okay, it's the same, same old. Chachma is a process where there's a difficulty with something, and there has to be a breakthrough. Now the shaila is, why does it work this way? You say that's how it works. Is there a seichel behind this? What's the reasoning? What's the, what is it called? A rhythm to the. What's the meaning behind this? The meaning behind this is quite profound. So Chassidus explains, the Balatanya explains, that in every relationship, whenever there's a relationship between two things or two people, there's always a question. The question is, who yields to whom? When two cars are coming into the same road, they have a sign, yield or stop. Either you have the right of way, or I have the right of way. Whenever you have a relationship, who dominates the relationship? Is it one person or is it the other person? Do they both have to compromise? That's a question. You have relationships, whereas they say one person wears the pants, and the other person becomes completely subservient to you. I lose my identity in you. You have a relationship, the opposite. You lose your identity in me. Obviously, there's something challenging in those relationships. Why? Because it's not an ultimate relationship. Because one of the people can't be there with their full presence. Right? There's a t-shirt I once told you, I'm very easy to get along with once you learn to worship me. But if you don't learn to worship me, I'm not easy to get along with. So whenever there's a relationship, there is always this challenge. Yeah. Who is the one who defines the relationship? Is it you who defines it and I'm just subservient to you, or is it the other way around? And sometimes there's a lot of learning curves, creating space, compromising, opening yourself up to the other, meeting each other halfway, right? Take a marriage. If there's people don't learn how to compromise, if they don't learn how to see the other person's perspective, well, it's impossible. It's not unless it's going to be very difficult, or somebody's just going to lose their identity. You have to learn. It works both ways. I have to learn your perspective. I have to listen. I have to open myself up to your mindset. It's not so easy for people, especially if you're a very defensive person, not because of yourself, because of your wounds. You can't really let other people into your life. It's very, very hard, right? People who suffer from different conditions, b'shoigeg or b'mezid, b'oinus or b'rotzen. It's a big challenge. You know what I'm talking about. You're looking at me like I'm saying something strange. You never heard about these issues? Huh? It's a very common thing. It's a very difficult thing. Sometimes people, it's not even there, they would like to. The person maybe, a person doesn't know how to. He doesn't know how to. For him, it's a form of suicide to let somebody else in. If he gives up space, if he gives up any shtochim of his territory, it's going to be, he's afraid, Hamas is going to take over. Because that's where he's been living for many years. Now, I'm not going to describe the neuroscience of it, the trauma of it, etc., the amygdala, all these in your Titus, but it's real stuff. Okay. So let's now go back to a deeper place. Chachma and Binah is about a relationship. There's a relationship between people, but there's a relationship between me and an idea. When an idea comes into my mind, it's a relationship. It's a relationship between me and the idea. It's a marriage. In Kabbalah, it's called zivugim. Everything is a zivug in Kabbalah. There's nothing in Kabbalah that's not a zivug. If you're familiar a little with Kisvei Arizal, the zivug chachma bin, it's called zivug. Zivug means marriage, intimacy. The zivug zun, zoh nukva, midas and malchus is a zivug. The zivug ha'olamus, everything is zivugim. Everything is relationships. Why is everything relationships? Because al pi Kabbalah, everything is a relationship. The DNA of the world is a relationship. The first thing is Hashem wanted a relationship. Ein oid milvadai. Alter Rebbe says, Loi toiv heyoisa adam levadai esa lo yeza kenegdai. It's not good for man to be alone. That's the beginning. The first thing, Loi toiv. It says, Loi toiv heyes ha-adam levadai. So he says in Torah, ha-adam is adam ha'elyon. Before creation, Hashem was levadai. Ein oid milvadai. Loi toiv heyes ha-adam levadai. The Adam felt it's not good for me to be alone. Esa lo yezer. I want to create a help. Kenegdai through the opposition. So the whole fabric of creation is a relationship. It's not like relationships are some mistake in the world, At some point you got to get married, your parents want to get rid of you, we already want nachas from your kids, so we throw you out of the house, get married. Right? It's what often we don't understand. Right? People think there's the world of Yiddishkeit, there's the world of relationships. And somehow Rabbi Waiwa uses too many times the word relationships. Why use so many times the word relationships? It's a psagoyish avart, it's an ishkin shein avart. Right? So you want to use a different word, you can use a different word. You can use the word from Kisvei Arizal, zivug zun, zivug abba ve'ima, zivug atek va'arich. You could do that also, if the willst. I'm not invested in the English word relationships. But the point is that relationships is not just a detail in the world. It's the essence of creation. It's the essence of Matan Torah. The Medrash says Matan Torah was al yoinim yedul tachtoinim, v'tachtoinim yalul al yoinim. When I want to absorb an idea, that idea coming into me is a form of a marriage. There's a relationship between me and the idea, and many great things could come of it, like in any relationship, or nothing could come of it. That depends on the situation. Whenever there's a relationship, the question is, who dominates? Is it me or is it the idea? Who dominates? Do I wear the pants in the relationship, or does the idea wear the pants in the relationship? Now, what I'm saying sounds abstract, but you'll see how this develops. Or they could become equal. And how does that happen? Is it like 50-50? So you have two stages. Stage number one is Chachma. Stage number two is Binah. What's the reason that a certain idea couldn't come into my head? I couldn't understand it. You understood it right away, I couldn't. We're learning the same text. I read it, you read it, you read it again, It's a gate nicht. Doesn't go in. So there could be many different explanations. But the nekuda in all of them is that there's something that's not letting it come in. There's a blockage, whatever the blockage is. If I want to use a very physical metaphor, even though it's inappropriate, maybe it's too technical. But if I have a cup, and the cup is 7 ounces, so 7 ounces could fit into the cup. If you want to give me 20 ounces, or you want to give me a gallon, you need to give me a different cup. So there's a cup and there's a cup, right? A cup has certain parameters, at least those that I'm used to. I have certain walls. I have 7 ounces. If you give me something that's 7 ounces, my cup contains it. If you give me something that's 20 ounces, 30 ounces, 50 ounces, you start giving me gallons and 100 gallons, I'm sorry. I'm like, You got the wrong guy. Go find another cup. You can almost feel it sometimes. It's like your head is resisting, like, don't go. My head is not a keli for this. My cup doesn't go there. I need things that I could contain. This idea is too deep for me. It's too challenging for me. It's beyond the walls of my cup. It's beyond the parameters of my brain. It's not really beyond the parameters of my brain, because how much percent of our brain do we use throughout our life? But it's beyond, 5, 5. If you're Einstein, 5%, and if you're not Einstein, we won't even give the number. But it's a very small percent. But my perceived parameters of my brain, I'm like, sorry, my cup is too small for this. Leave me alone. What has to happen? The first thing that has to happen is Koyach ma. V'nachnu ma. What's v'nachnu ma? And this is critical. Moshe Rabbeinu says, v'nachnu ma ki salinu aleinu. What are we? Ma. Ma is what? What does it mean, what are we? What is he saying? What are we? Moshe is explaining to the Jewish people, you don't understand me. You think that I'm hungry for power. I'm trying to control you. I'm trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to exploit you. I'm trying to use you. I'm trying to exercise my power over you. So you're attacking me, you're criticizing me, you're judging me, you want to stone me. Moshe Rabbeinu says, you have to learn who I am. V'nachnu ma. What am I? What are we? And that's basically what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying is, I'm not looking to be powerful over you. I'm your servant. I'm a conduit. There's no I present who's trying to control situations. I'm a messenger of Hashem. I don't have an identity that is separate, that's trying to overpower you. What's the word Chachma? Koyach ma. It's the koyach to say what? It's the power to say what? Ma. Curiosity, inquisitiveness. It's also the koyach of ma. It's the koyach that it doesn't have an identity, doesn't have an ego. The definition of the koyach is ma. What is it? If you'll ask Chachma, who are you? He says, I don't have a name. Ma. Why? Because the definition of Chachma is openness to something that's beyond me, to something that's transcendent, to something that's higher than my perceived brain. What happens, you look, whenever you have an epiphany, whenever something pops into your brain, whenever you have that blitz, that lightening moment, the light bulb goes, what happened a few seconds before? Most people don't realize this. But next time you have an epiphany, ask yourself, what happened a few seconds before? A few minutes before, a few hours before? And you'll see. I'll tell you what happened. What happened was, you read it once, you read it twice, you read it 3 times. You couldn't understand it. You tried again and again and again, maybe for days, maybe for weeks. It wasn't going. You know what happened? You got frustrated with yourself. Frustrated in a good way. The recognition that I really don't get it. I really don't get it. In other words, as long as I am I don't get it. That's humility. That's the beginning of Koyach ma. It's the beginning of Koyach ma. What happened right before the epiphany was you were walking in the street and you were completely focused on that idea. You were so focused on it, you didn't realize how focused you were on it. You know when you're thinking about something and you don't realize you're thinking about it, right? And then when the shiur is over, it's like, oh, wow, for 5 minutes I was thinking about this, I didn't even realize. You were so immersed in it, you know those daydreams, right? The good daydreams? You were so immersed in it, that you didn't realize you were immersed in it. You were so immersed in the idea that your consciousness was completely there. You weren't conscious about the fact that you're being conscious. You were completely focused. What happens at that moment? Your I surrenders, is trying to surrender to the truth. And because your I was mevatel itself, how was it mevatel itself? Not through hammers, and not through stones, and not through axes, and not through swords. It was mevatel itself from an internal space where you just become frustrated, annoyed with your intellectual ego, and you realize there's something much deeper, and you were completely immersed on the idea. So what happened was, you literally, like by Yerichai, the walls of my cup came down, and it created space for ayin. It created space. What's ayin? Ha-chachma me ayin timatze. What's ayin? Ayin, we always say, it's not nothingness. It's no thingness. It's an idea that comes from a place that's beyond a thing. It's beyond that which I could have grasped a moment ago. For me, it was ayin. Why was it ayin? Because I had no tfis in it. My cup couldn't grab it. It didn't fit into my vessels. It transcended my vessels. It was something deeper. But when I put down my ego, when I laid down the walls, I created space, right? I expanded the cup. So the ayin says, oh, now I could come in. Now I could come in. You know, the Kotzker famously asked his Talmidim, "Who is God? Where is Hashem?" They said, everywhere. He said, "Nein, wo malastem arayin." Will you let him in? The Kotzker Rebbe didn't know that Malach Haloretz Kveda. He didn't say it in Shachris. In Poland, they didn't have Uncle Moshe's song, Hashem is there, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Who is God? Another question, who is God? Malach Haloretz Kveda. Lesa Sarponim in it says in Zoya. There's no space devoid of him. Yeah, God is everywhere, but the question is, Vu bist du? Where are you? He's here, but where are you? Says, I have to let you in. Letting you in is a very, very heavy step. He calls it a tachlis habitl. Tachlis habitl. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Perek Dalet. Mishnah Chaf, at the end of, close to the end of Perek Dalet. Elisha ben Avuya, the only time Elisha ben Avuya is quoted. In Mishnah is the only time Elisha ben Avuya, if I'm not mistaken, is quoted by his name. Chazal didn't even like to refer to him by his name. They called him Acher, because he was from hundreds of Tanoim and Amirayim. He's the only one who was OTD. He went over the derech, but there was a big sensation because Elisha ben Avuya wasn't a Yosef Kronos. You understand? He was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. You're talking about one of the G'dolei Hadar. So the fact that he left Yiddishkeit, obviously, you understand, it made the WhatsApps were busy for a few months. The WhatsApps, if you remember the WhatsApps. Everybody was busy with Elisha ben. They stopped calling him by the fact that they changed his name. You could see it was a trauma. What they changed his name for? They called him Acher. They didn't even want to say his name. Reb Meir continued to learn by him, so he's not quoted. But in Pirkei Avos, Perek Dalet, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi decided to quote him. Elisha ben Avuya, and what did he quote him? It's a very interesting thing. What did he quote him? Haloi metorah yeled l'mahu daima. You remember? L'dyoich suv al nayer chadash. Haloi metorah zaken l'mahu daima l'dyoich suv al nayer machak. If you teach Torah to a child, it's like ink transcribed on fresh paper, fresh papyrus, fresh parchment. It's fresh, it's new. And the ink gets absorbed beautifully into the paper. If you teach Torah to a zaken, to an old person, it's like writing on nayar machuk. If you have a piece of paper, you wrote, and then you erase, and you write again, and you erase. So the ink is not easily absorbed. That's what Elisha ben Avuya says. The obvious question is, my kamashmalan, what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? Everybody knows you need Elisha ben Avuya to tell you that when children learn something, it goes in much deeper and it stays there. You know, children are like wet sponges. They absorb everything. If you want to teach a language to an adult, good luck. Right? Children, their brains are so pliable and so impressionable. Right? You remember, your children remember everything. They remember what you said. They remember what you did. My kid sometimes reminds me what I said to him 10 years ago. I don't even remember what I said yesterday. What's the chiddush of the Mishnah? That children absorb much better? I mean, it's a well-known fact. You need Elisha ben Avuya to say it. But there's also another question. Pirkei Avos is not some statements about life. Pirkei Avos, the Gemara says about Bekama, is milah de chasidusa. It helps people develop midas chasidus, lefnim mishur sadin, piety. If he's trying to teach you that you should teach Torah to your child, you shouldn't wait till he becomes an adult. It's a mitzvah sesim in a Torah. It says, V'shinantam levanecha, v'limadetem ma'asem es b'neichem. It's a mitzvah essay on a father to teach his child Torah. If he's just saying that it's a good thing to teach a child, he wants to encourage you even more and explain it to you, fine. So he could say, don't lose the childhood years to learn, and don't lose the childhood years to teach your child. But the second half is a little disturbing. Because let's say there's a Jew who didn't learn Torah as a child. Take Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Rabbi Akiva was Elisha ben Avuya's student and friend. He didn't learn Torah till he was 40. He comes to such a Mishnah. What are you telling him? Bist an alter, whatever, yeah? Whatever you learn is going to be Dioik Suv al Naya Machak. Even if you want to bring out the point, say it in the positive. Encourage people to teach Torah to little children when they're young, because it's going to be absorbed like never before. You really have to say the negative. What's going to be the message? An older person who never learned. What is he taking out of this Mishnah? A lost case. It's all Naya Machak. Nothing is going to go in. Let's say you have Yidden Bali Tshuva. Yeah, they didn't learn Torah till they were 30, 40, 50, 60. I know a Yid who became a Bal Tshuva at 79. 79 they started to become Bal Tshuva. I know a person in their 80s, they're thinking about becoming Bal Tshuva. Huh? Right? And now you imagine starting to learn Gemara. Imagine starting even reading Hebrew. So you open up a Mishnah. Pirkei Avos is one of the first things you learn. Right? Dioik Suv al Naya Machak. It's erased. Well, what's the Havana? It was once a Fabrengen Shabbos afternoon. It was in the summer days, Pirkei Avos. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe would teach a Mishnah and he would explain it. So he asked these questions. And he said that Pshat in the Mishnah is much deeper. The Mishnah is not only talking about biology. The Mishnah is not only talking about a child and an old person in years. He says years don't always go by the passport. Years go by the attitude. The Mishnah is talking about a way of learning. Elisha ben Avuya is teaching how to learn. You could be an old person, but you learn as a child. And you could be a young person, but you learn as an old person. What's Pshat? He says, I could be a young person, but I'm learning like a zaken. What's Pshat? I'm learning like a zaken? He says it's an approach. Dioik Suv al Naya Machak. Dioik Suv al Naya Machak means I'm not really ready for anything new. I'm not. I already have my way, my mahalach, my structure. I'm ready to listen, but it has to fit in to the filing cabinets. I have a filing cabinet. I'll take out a file. I'll put you into the file. Fakert. And then, it's a nice word. It's another word. I could say it over Shabbos by the table. Say it over Shalashud. Say it over by Mincha. Say it over to my Chavrusa. You understand? You guys know that mahalach. Huh? And if a taka doesn't fit in, what do? Either I fall asleep, or I dismiss it, or I make it fit in. I only hear that which I'm capable of hearing. So Elisha ben Avuya says that's not how you're supposed to learn. You have to always be a yeled, a child. How does a child learn? You see it in children's faces. That's why it's so painful to see when we use children and we give them information that is sometimes destructive, because they're so innocent. When you speak to young Galai, the moment you open, it's a tremendous hezek. It could be a tremendous. On the contrary, however, that child, he says, is completely open. There's no cynicism. Child didn't shut down yet. The child takes it in. The child is ready to hear new things. And that's why children have such good memories. Why do you children remember almost everything and adults don't? And the answer is, you'll forgive me, I hope present company excluded, most adults, when they listen, they're not listening. They're developing opinions. You can ask, when you listen to something, are you really listening, or you're actually thinking, that was good, I like it? I don't agree. He said that already. Oh, that I know. This I'm going to use. Right? You know what I mean? Anybody knows what I'm talking about? Adults sit with opinions. Even if your opinion is good. Even if your opinion is, wow, it's amazing. You're not listening. You're complimenting. There's a time to listen. Wow, gewaltige Wort. I'm going to say it over. I'm not listening. I'm having an opinion. Children listen. So Elisha ben Avuya is saying, you have to learn like a child. It's not about years. How should you learn? Dioik Suv al Nayar Chodesh. Dioik Suv al Nayar Chodesh is, it can really go in. How can it really go in? Only through Chachma, bittul. And I should tell you, it's not easy because these are subconscious things. It's not like I tell myself, I'm not really going to listen to a new thing. No, of course I would listen to new things. Subconsciously, I'm not ready to step away. I'm not ready to step away. I have a mahalach. And sometimes the more developed you are, the more dangerous you are. Because if you were a shegitz, right? You understand what I'm saying? There's an expression in Gemara and Chagiga. This is now it's a little sensitive. Kelim hanigmarim l'tara tzrichim tvila l'kodesh. You know what that means? Some of you learned Masechta Chagiga not long ago. Kelim hanigmarim l'tara tzrichim tvila l'kodesh. It means as follows. A keli, until it's complete, until it's usable, can't get tameh. When you're building a vessel, a keli, a utensil doesn't get tameh until it's nigmar, until it's finished. So let's say somebody is tameh, is fashioning the keli. I don't care, because as long as it's not complete, it can't get tameh. But kelim hanigmarim b'tara, when the keli is you're doing the final touches, and you make sure that only a pure person did it. So the keli was completed b'tara. So l'chayda you could use it for anything. If you want to use it for karbanas, let's say you want to put a carbon chatas in it, right? A holy food, you have to put it in the mikveh again. It's a special chumrah that Chazal made for karbanas. Yeah. So there's a chassidish shataish, there's a chassidic interpretation. Kelim anigmarim betara. Sometimes a person says, I'm a keli, and I'm complete in my purity. Tzrichim tvila. Tvila is the word habitl. Tvila is the same letters like habitl, because going to the mikveh, tvila is bitl, habitl. Hey, beis, yud, tes, lamed is tvila. What does it mean to go under the water? Under the water you can't live. So why do we go under the water? Because under the water means you're going to a place where essentially it's a form where if I would stay there, you can't live. And then you become pure, because the only way you could become pure is if you completely step out of the identity the way you know it. You go into the mikveh, which is a place that you can't live. So it's really a form of transformation, of metamorphosis. Tzrichim tvila, habitl l'kodesh, to be able to experience kedusha. If I'm not a keli hanigma betara, right? So then I'm actually more open. I'm like a child. That's why, and I say this with a lot of sensitivity and respect, sometimes it's much easier to speak to secular Jews than it is to religious Jews. You understand why? Because a secular Jew has an advantage. He often doesn't think that he knows anything about Judaism. He never grew up with it. But the frum Jew, ich weiß alles. What in the world are you going to tell me? I know everything. You and me know he knows nothing. He knows nothing. He knows a lot of information, but he knows nothing. Because the entire brain was molded by a certain conception of Judaism that is extremely narrow, extremely limited, and sometimes even ridiculous, and sometimes even abusive. But even if not abusive, it's sometimes very, very narrow and limited. Right, but how do you tell that to somebody? So you understand the level of bittul you need. So kelim anigmarim betara, they need much more bittul. Because I know it all already. I should become a yelad. I'm not a child. I'm a zokin. So Elisha ben Avuya says, no, I don't care if you're 90 years old, be a child. Remain a child. Open, completely open. But that takes a lot of inner confidence, a lot of security, because sometimes there's a lot of voices in me that say, things are settled, don't shake them up. Right? You tough what I'm saying, everybody? Huh? You have no opinion. You have no opinion. Why did it, and the Rebbe then said, that's why he quotes Elisha ben Avuya. Because the Gemara says about Elisha ben Avuya in Chagiga that at his bris, his Yerushalmi Chagiga, his bris, the Tanoim were all sitting. And the father saw they were learning, they were waiting for the bris, so they were learning. And the father saw, you had the Gdolei HaTanoim were there, and the father saw the fire coming out of their mouths. And he says, V'hoyu advarim smeichim k'nesinasum es-Sinai. The words were full of simcha, like when it was given from Sinai. He felt the Kedush of Har Sinai. So the father said, if this is the koyach of Torah, I want to dedicate my child to Torah. And he dedicated Elisha ben Avuya to Torah. That's what the Yerushalmi says. So Elisha ben Avuya, even though later he left, but as a child, he was absorbed with Torah. So in many ways, this Mishnah in Pirkei Avos brings out something very special. That Haloimet Torah Yeled Lamahu Daimet goes in deep and deep. And Elisha ben Avuya, even though later he left it, but as a child, he was completely absorbed with it. And that means that it became part of his essence, part of his core. So in many ways, it's like a certain a pidyon haneshama, a redemption of the soul. Because the Gemara is a whole story in Bavli, how they, his Talmidim wanted to get him out of Gehenna into Gan Eden. So the Mishnah here is bringing out something very special in the name of Elisha ben Avuya, which also applies to Elisha ben Avuya. So all of this, okay, we'll finish in 3 minutes. It's already late. But what does this all bring out? This is the first step. The first step in the marriage is, the first step in a relationship is, I have to be completely open to the other. Really open. And that takes Chachma. That's Chachma. Chachma me'ayin timatze. And that's where always there's an epiphany. There will never be a baraka mavrik if I'm in a state of yesh. If you're trying to control it, it's never going to happen. You say, I'm going to understand the idea. You better go into me. It will run away. The epiphany always happens in a moment when you're not in control. Why? Why could you say, I better get it? Because if I better get it, you're not going to get it. It always has to happen from the person opening themselves up to something deeper. Then there's stage 2. What's the problem with Chachma? The problem with Chachma is it's amazing, but I'm not there. The eye, clarity, but it's forest. But it was a real forest. It was like wilderness. So when it became dark, it became dark. It's not like in the city where it becomes dark, but it's never really dark. There's always a light here and a light there. There you really saw what pitch dark is. Pasha couldn't see anything. I'm laughing. It was pretty dangerous. And then I remember there was a lightning, but the house was pitch dark. And then there was a lightning, so we managed to see where there was a candle and a match. The lightning was gone. It was pitch dark, but we now knew to walk to that place and light a candle. When we lit a candle, it was light. So there was nothing got me. Binah is I got it. Binah, you resurface back into your reality, and with your identity, you take apart that light and you flesh it out and you assimilate it into the structures of your mind. That's called Binah. After Binah, I got it. But you'll notice something. In Binah, you will never have the clarity that you had in Chachma. And people always crave to go back. That moment, I got it. Why? Because the clarity of Chachma came because I wasn't present. And in Binah, I'm present. So it never has that same clarity. Also, you'll see, Chachma never comes in many words. It's always a few words. Binah comes in a lot of words. Because Chachma is Oir and Binah is Kalim. Chachma is the light. It doesn't come with many yosis. It's usually 6 words, 5 words, 4 words, 7 words. The epiphany doesn't come with big words because it's pre-oisius. It's beyond verbal. There's different levels of Chachma, but Chachma be'etzem is pre-verbal. It's almost like a picture. Binah is all about words, because Binah is names and structures and stories and definitions and descriptions. So Binah is oisius. So that's the first thing he explains. Moichin da Abba is bittul. Moichin da Im is yesh. Moichin da Abba is the state in which I transcend my eyes, so I'm open to a completely new concept. That's transcendent. Moichin da Ima is the opposite. Moichin da Ima is lahanchil oyavai yesh. It fits into my structure. Because if it stays in the world of Chachma, it's amazing. But I wasn't there. I lost myself in Chachma. Now, you need to lose yourself in order to find yourself. Because if you don't lose yourself, what are you going to find? Right? So you have to lose yourself to find yourself. Because if you don't lose yourself, if you lose yourself, there's something to find. So in Chachma, in that stage of the relationship, I'm completely open. It's very, very deep bittul. And then Binah is, bring it back into your kalim, into your vessels. It says in Zohar, Vayhi Or is Chachma. Choshech is Binah. Why is Binah Choshech? In many ways, Binah is more Or than Chachma, because Binah, you could talk about it, you can give a drasha, you can write it down, you could write a paper, you could write a sefer. Chachma, you can't write anything. But Binah, legabi Chachma is darkness. Because the oir of Chachma will never be replicated in Binah. And the reason it'll never be replicated in Binah is because Binah imposes structure on something that's really beyond structure. You're feeling what I'm saying? You ever experienced this? If you deal with ideas, you know the difference of Chachma and Binah. You have that light. It doesn't repeat itself. It's like a lightning. It goes away. It's too elusive. Because you can't grab it. Because if you grab it, it's not it. HaChachma me ayin timotze. And ayin, by definition, doesn't let you grab it. Because if you grab it, it's not ayin. It's a thing. I can grab a tissue box. Right? But how do you grab light? Grab light. Now, if light was only a particle, maybe you can grab it. If light is a wave, how do you grab it? So whenever something is yesh, you can grab it. When something is ayin, if you try to grab it, you'll grab everything. You won't grab the ayin. So whenever we try to grab God, or grab Yiddishkeit, or grab truth, what happens? You don't get it. You don't get it. Right? The definition of Chachma is that I don't get it. I don't get it. You're right. It gets me. That's the Nukud of Ayin. That's Koyach Ma v'nachnu ma. Moshe Rabbeinu says that's who I am. That's who Moshe's identity was v'nachnu ma. He says it a few times in Chumash. That is his identity. Moshe was Chachma. Koyach Ma. That is his Koyach. It's the Koyach Ma. I don't have a name. Chachma is not stuck in an orbit. Chachma is never stuck in a box. Chachma is never stubborn. Chachma is never afraid. Chachma is forever open. Chachma is a child, in the most beautiful sense of the word. And therefore Chachma absorbs new things that Binah on its own won't absorb it. Now Chachma and Binah really work together. They're best friends. They could also not work together. They can get divorced. But ultimately Chachma and Binah have to get married because they're an amazing marriage. But an amazing marriage is only when Binah really respects Chachma and Chachma really respects Binah. Binah takes Chachma and makes it concrete. You know how husbands come home and they tell their wives, I have an idea, I have a dream. And she's like, relax. Let's analyze this. You know when husbands say, I have an unbelievable Chalamaya trip for the family. Really? And who's making the food? And how we're getting there? And what happens when the kids have to go to the bathroom? Right? And what happens? You forgot there's a dentist appointment, a doctor's appointment. Right? Oh, I didn't realize. So Chachma and Binah need a very good marriage, as we will see. Have a wonderful day. Be'ez Hashem will continue tomorrow, 7:45 a.m.
On this Bible, where did Elisha go wrong?
Elisha?
He said, who went Acher?
Oh, Elisha ben Avuya.
Yeah.
Oh, what happened to Elisha ben Avuya? Yeah.
Without Binah, he would.
There's a lot of, Chazal tell a lot of stuff. It even says over there in Gemara, one of the opinions is that because his father dedicated him to Torah, only because he saw the fire with Shaloi Lishma, so therefore it affected his learning. That's one thing in the story. He saw a kid die by Shiloh Hakan, and you know the story. A father sent his son to do the mitzvah of Shiloh Hakan, and a snake bit him. He did the mitzvah of Kabbalah Sevicha Vesimecha and Shiloh Hakan, the only two mitzvahs that the Torah promises Arichas Yamim. So he saw a lot. He saw different things in his life. You know, he saw the Churban of Bayesheni. There were different things that happened that caused him to leave. The Gemara says, "Chagiga he nichnesu lepardes." He was one of the four who went into the orchard. Kitzitz benetius. No, he was a big mind. Reb Meir continued to learn by him, but he himself was Kitzitz benetius. Yeah.
I got a lot of
Gewaldig.
So physics, I think about light is photons. It's not really motion, right?
Light is photons, yeah.
Waves or different
Waves, particles, yeah. They're not. They thought it was a particle, and they realized it's a wave. They thought it's a wave, and then they realized it's both, and the paradox
Matter
coexists.
is really not also.
That's true.
So if matter, let's assume that.
Even matter is what?
So if you say or it's photons, let's say, and then
Photons.
structure, the Binah is structure.
Structure.
Even on a physical level, even atoms are not just structure.
Right.
Like you can throw a ball and hit the bat and go through. Technically, matter is just also. So really, Binah is also.
That's true. That's true. Even matter we know is not structure. Matter is also light.
Binah is really.
And Einstein showed that energy and matter, right?
I'm saying that from the.
That's true.
Philosophically, really, Binah is also.
Yes. Really, Binah is also Ur. But as we're going to see, Binah is the way that the Ur gets grasped. What makes matter matter? Our perception of it. Our perception of it makes it matter. Right? Max Planck said that we used to think consciousness is a derivative of matter. Today we know matter is a derivative of consciousness. What makes matter matter is consciousness, my perception of it. The tools I use, and that's exactly what Binah is. The tools I use to define it in a certain way that work for my system, that's what makes matter matter. And that's why it's called Yesh. But it's really all Ur. Of course.
It really is.
Of course.
It's almost like an illusion.
Of course. I wouldn't call it an illusion because it's part of the reality that God created. The tools are part of the reality. So it's not illusion in the sense that it's stam dimyan, that it's just not based in reality, but it's based on the certain tools which are based on perception, which are part of reality. It's also part of reality.
And if there is no observer, there is no perception.
The fact that even in light, right, when we observe it, right, we can observe the paradox. When we observe light, it collapses into one model, one modality.
It's
Means
one or another.
Because the observer imposes his or her limits on the reality, and that taka becomes the reality for them. It's not a joke. It's not like a cynical, magical trick. I really impose my reality. When there's no observer, the reality can remain in its paradoxical dualities.
Measure something scientifically. Measure something in a lab. The measurements of the probe interferes with the measurement.
Yes.
So you can't.
That's unbelievable.
You can't really measure it.
In a lab, we know when we measure things.
It is what you measure.
Yeah.
It is actually
The
what you
measurements,
measure.
the measuring interferes with what you're measuring. So the moment you're measuring it, you're not measuring it. That's the nakud. And ayin, the moment you're measuring it, it's beautiful, but you're not measuring it anymore. To not measure it, you actually have to close your eyes. You not measure it, because it's not measurable. Measuring is already an imposition.
By the way, this is a physical.
This is why all of science today is all based on humility. It's based on transcendence and humility. If not, you're completely distorting reality.
The truth is,
You have to be a child. You have to completely be a child.
if you're a physicist today, you know that in order for something to exist, it needs to be an observer to observe it. So this world cannot exist without observer. It's
Right.
furnished. If there is no one
That's
to
incredible.
observe,
If there's nobody to observe it, you're saying it doesn't exist.
exist.
The matter doesn't exist.
do you exist?
Huh? So we have a fascinating idea. It's almost like Hashem wanted to create a world. In order to do that, he had to create an observer.
He wasn't. He isn't. Yeah.
He had to literally, we become observers, and that's what makes the world the world.
And that's why you actually.
And if we transcend ourselves as being observers, we go, what's it called, the observatory, when they have these places where you observe, if we transcend that position and we become aligned with the source, so the whole world becomes part of infinity.
That's the concept of
Of course. Neshama is a wave, not a particle.
By the way, the wave, matter, and energy, it's all the same. It comes from Planck and Einstein.
Wave, matter, and energy are one.
Einstein made the equation between energy and matter,
Right.
and the Planck made the equation
wave.
with a wave and
Wave, energy, matter.
Yeah, sorry, what's the pasuk that you spoke the Maimar of?
Perik Yud Ches, Pasuk Chav Gimel. V'avad Halevi hu. Right here.
It doesn't-
18:23. Numbers 18:23. Va'avad Halevi hu. The word hu is difficult. So the Zohar says the avodah of the Levi is to bring out the hu, as he'll explain later in the Maimon. Sure.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you.
It's worth the drive from Teaneck.
He comes from Teaneck in the morning.
It's unbelievable. This is Mesiras Nefesh Mamish.